Hello everybody and welcome back to Lockdown in Lockdown Part 18. I'm pretty sure that's right today. First thing today, I'm obviously wearing a Christmas t-shirt, but it feels like we've been in lockdown for about 10 months, so I figured, who cares? I'm sorry for not inviting Elsie in yesterday. A few of you said I should have let her in, and I should have let her in. My daughter, who, if you hadn't listened to yesterday's episode, was trying to get through the door because she was hungry. The only trouble was, she's very persistent, so if I'd let her in, she wouldn't have left, and it was a really scary bit of the book, and she's only 4, so I didn't really want her to be scarred for life. I mean, to be honest, that's what horror authors like. You know, they like scarring people for life, but maybe when they're a bit older than 4. But I promise if they come up again, I'll let them come in and introduce themselves, unless it's a really scary bit. So, we are out of Furnace. Well, I say that, but we are in the tunnels beneath Furnace. Alex, Z, and Gary. There's no sign of Toby, I'm afraid. I think Toby is probably gone, have escaped Furnace. They dropped into the river beneath the prison. They almost died in the river, and they are trying to find their way through the tunnels and caverns that have literally never seen light before, some of these places. And they've just squeezed through a terrifyingly narrow tunnel in the rock and found themselves in a cavern. And where we left them yesterday is when they realise that they're not alone in the cavern, and something in the cavern with a twisted body and silver eyes and blood on its breath is now running towards them. This chapter is called Daylight. Ooh, promising. I might have had a chance. I might have outrun the beast if Gary hadn't decided to use me as bait. For an instant, the light blazed, brighter than ever, and I felt rough hands on my chest shoving me backwards. Then the boundless night reasserted itself, and I floundered on the uneven ground, bouncing off a shape that loomed up before me and causing us both to trip hard. I thought it was the creature, and I expected to feel teeth in my neck, filthy claws in my skin. Lashing out, I caught it on the jaw with my palm, heard a choked cry, "Alex, it's me!" Z, his hands up to his face to guard against my blows. I put my fists to better use, pushing myself off the wet stone and helping him get to his feet. The footsteps were so close I could feel them, the tremor travelling up my shins, and I was almost grateful that Gary was now so distant that only the merest flicker of yellow light remained. It meant I couldn't see the nightmare at our heels. "Run!" I yelled, although it was hardly necessary. Z was already ahead of me, nothing but smoke against shadow, his guttural breathing the only thing giving him away. I managed to run too, sprinting across the cavern, even though my legs felt like they'd been broken in a million places. It's funny how much strength the human body can find when it's really pushed, and there's nothing like the fear of a grotesque monster breathing down your neck to help you reach your full potential. I'd only taken a dozen strides when I struck something on the floor beneath me. I cried out, more in shock than in pain, feeling the cavern spin as I cartwheeled over the broken rock. It was on me before I could pick myself up. A skid of feet, then fingers like iron on my chest. It screamed, a shriek of triumph that pierced my ears and my heart, a fog of sickening breath smothering me like a net. I tried to think, tried to pull my arms free, tried to fight it, tried to do anything other than wait for it to take my life. But the truth is, I was too scared to move, too scared to breathe, too scared to think. I lay there, as motionless and silent as if it had already killed me. I'm not sure what happened next. I could hear more feet pounding towards me, surely too quickly to be human. I heard a crack right above my head, and the dead weight lifted. There was a shout, another scream, the scuffling of cloth on rock and the dull thump of fist on flesh. Snarling, spitting. Then, incredibly, a voice seeming to rise from the confusion. "Go," it said, the sound of sandpaper on wood. "There isn't much time. Get up and run." I didn't need to be told again. I heaved my aching body off the ground and staggered blindly away, not caring where I was going so long as the madness was behind me. There was another crunch, this time followed by a pitiful groan. Then I felt hands on my arms again, wrenching my body around, the grip so hot I could feel the sting even through my overalls. They twisted me to my left, then pushed me forwards. "This way," said the voice, a whisper that nevertheless seemed to make the air tremble. "Watch your feet." I lifted my leg high, feeling a rock graze the bottom of my foot. There was a chilling shriek from behind me, followed by another, and the arms pushed with more urgency, guiding me around a stalagmite that I never could have seen. "Who are you?" I asked between gasped breaths. "It doesn't matter. You need to go." But why are you..." I stopped as we rounded a corner, and a light came into view, so insubstantial that it looked like the last scraps of a morning mist. The pressure on my arms vanished, leaving only the memory of its touch, and I turned to see my guide. But he was already retreating, his body blurring into what looked like a starry sky. Except the glinting sparks I saw before me weren't stars. They were the demonic eyes of a dozen creatures tearing this way. I turned and fled, the light now bright enough to make out any obstacles that stood in my way. I raced around a pillar of stone, expecting to see Gary, but the glow wasn't emanating from there. It was flowing down a passageway ahead, too bright to be coming from a helmet lamp, surely too bright, too pure to be coming from any artificial source. Something in my gut twisted so hard that it felt like I was being tickled by an invisible hand, and it took me a moment to realise what it was. Hope. It had been so long since I'd felt it that the sensation was like something living inside me, something wonderful, waiting to break free, just like I was. The sound of screams and the clatter of rocks being thrown snapped me to attention. I cast a sightless look back into the cavern, which sounded like it was home to a full-blown riot, then focused on the light, letting its warm touch pull me forwards. It seemed to gain in strength as I rounded a corner, the corridor growing wider and taller, as if the stone itself was being pushed back by the glow. It ended in a gnarled trunk of rock, but there was a gap large enough for me to squeeze into. When I clawed my way through to the other side, I saw Z there, pacing the identical passageway beyond and chewing what little was left of his nails. He looked up when he saw me, his expression morphing from fear to surprise to relief in a fraction of a second. "Are you okay?" he said, running over. "I thought you were done for." I nodded up ahead to where the light seemed to stream in with even more strength, picking out every last detail on the splintered walls. "That looks like..." I said, but I couldn't bring myself to finish the sentence because I didn't want to jinx it. Z managed a tired smile as he slung my arm over his shoulder and helped me stagger forwards. "What happened back there?" he asked after a couple of steps. I shook my head. "It doesn't matter," I replied eventually, echoing the thing that had saved me. "I'll tell you about it when we're out in the open, when we're home free, okay?" "That's a deal," he said. "Can't be much further. The light's pretty bright. I bet Gary's already there." We wheeled around the bend and were almost blinded. The corridor ended maybe 30 yards away, the opening blazing with so much light that the sun could have been hanging right outside. We were drenched in it, its touch like honey on our bruised skin, and it flowed inside us too, chasing away every last scrap of darkness, every last breath of cold. I'm pretty sure we could have floated down the rest of that passageway if we'd wanted to, buoyed up and brought home by a river of golden light. We were so busy dreaming that neither of us took the time to wonder how daylight could ever penetrate so deep underground, so busy laughing that we didn't notice the walls around us weren't natural, that they'd been chiselled from the stone by pickaxes and hammers. For a blissful instant, we'd made it. We were free. Then we stepped into that portal of light together, our laughter one step ahead of us, and we saw what we both knew deep down we would. There was no sky, only rock, no sun, just remorseless spotlights scouring away all but the most persistent shadow from the tombstone walls. No trees, no life, other than the cluster of grinning forms standing before us, so close that we could make out the silver eyes and black suits, the rusting masks and filthy trench coats, the glistening lips peeled back past canine teeth. And there was no freedom, just the warden and his leather face, welcoming us back with the devil's grin. No! Welcoming party. For what seemed like an eternity, nobody moved. It was as if the entire cavern was frozen, a nightmare tableau stripped of motion. Or maybe it was just that time slowed down, my horror so profound that one single second of gut-wrenching realisation would haunt me for a lifetime. Eventually, the world seemed to catch up, this time snapping back into place and bringing the scene to life. The first thing I noticed was Gary, sprawled on the floor beneath a black suit. His face was a mess, but bubbles of air were bursting on his bloody lips, so I knew he was alive. Despite everything he'd done to me, I felt anger flood my veins at the sight of his injuries. Somewhere between jumping into the river and bursting into this cavern, he'd become one of us. Z was muttering something to my side, and when I heard the scuff of feet on rock, I thought he was trying to make a break for it, back the way we'd come. But when I turned to follow, I saw that he'd collapsed, his face so pale that it looked like parchment, almost transparent. Maybe, if I'd seen him run, I might have had the strength to follow, but I couldn't go alone. I had nothing left. I had a sudden flash of how I looked right then, just as ghost-like as Z, the only sign of colour, the spreading crimson stains where my life force was still draining out of me. My entire body was rice paper frail, ready to fold and crumple. I'd only felt this weak, once before, that night so long ago when Toby had been shot, when I'd been framed, running towards my mum, towards safety, but unable to reach home. I hadn't made it then, and I wasn't going to make it now. Both times I failed, and both times I was captured. Only this time, my punishment had to be death. I tried to take a step back, but my legs refused to obey, turning so numb and insubstantial that I didn't even feel pain when I crashed to my knees. Excuse me. The sound of a pistol shot filled the cavern. A second followed, then a third, and by the fifth crack, I realised it wasn't a gun at all, but the warden's hands. He was clapping slowly, each slap of his palms echoing from the walls and making me flinch. He strolled towards us, his applause relentless, before coming to a halt, almost close enough to touch. Clap. I twisted my head, studying his pristine black shoes. Clap. A grey suit without the slightest trace of a crease or stain. Clap. His lean body, his leathery neck, so strung with tendons that it looked as if there was a wire coiled beneath the ancient skin. Clap. And his face, so ordinary yet so wrong, like he was wearing somebody else's over his own. Clap. I tried to meet his eyes, knowing that I wouldn't be able to. I was right. Just when I thought I was looking at them, I realised that my gaze had slipped to his clothes or to the cavern walls. Caught in the corner of my vision, I couldn't even have told you if he had eyes. Just black sockets, which seemed to suck the light from around him, which seemed to drain away what little warmth was left in my bones. Clap! I tried again, and this time I almost caught them. It was like being plunged into freezing water, my body cramping, my lungs growing so heavy I couldn't take a breath. In that instant, I witnessed things in my head I couldn't even begin to describe. Blood, decay, screams, forced from his mind into mine, threatening to drive me insane. Clap! And just like that, they were gone, leaving only a pulsing headache where they had been probing with their filthy fingers. I shuddered, gagged, and wrenched my eyes away, the cavern swimming back into focus. The black suits and their dogs hadn't moved, and the Weezers in their shadows were motionless too, save for the occasional spasm. I guess they knew we weren't going to mess with the warden. He clapped once more, keeping his hands poised prayer-like in front of his chest for a moment, before lowering them into his trouser pockets. I just stared at the ground, as if the pebbles before me could offer a way out. "Bravo," he said, his voice like a rasp being dragged across the inside of my skull. "I have to confess that I am very impressed." "Please don't kill us," came a hoarse cry from Z. "We didn't mean any harm. He trailed off, his words lost in sobs. "Very impressed," the warden went on, as if he hadn't been interrupted. "To find a way out of my prison, to escape from Furnace itself. It's quite remarkable, really." Do we get a reward?" I whispered, but it was so quiet I didn't think anyone could have heard it. To my surprise, however, the warden began to laugh, a ragged breath that was as dry and lifeless as his face. "Oh, yes, you will have your reward, Sawyer, and a fitting one it is." He took his hands from his pockets and clasped them behind his back. "Where's the fourth?" I shuddered, wondering where Toby was now. There was no way he could have survived, caught in the jaws of the river with no bones left to break. But maybe his body had made it out, spat from the rock, and laid to rest beneath the endless blue sky. I'm not lying when I say that at that moment I would have traded my fate for his without a second thought. Better to be a spirit with the earth beneath you than a corpse pinned tight by the weight of the world. "He didn't make it," I replied eventually. "He was injured in the explosion, but he jumped anyway. He's dead." The warden clucked his tongue as if deep in thought. He was probably trying to work out whether I was telling the truth or whether to keep looking for Toby in the sprawling guts beneath the prison. I frowned, shaking some of the confusion from my brain. "How did you find us?" I asked. "How did you know we'd be here?" Even though I wasn't looking at his face, I could feel his lips part like those of a cadaver, a dead smile all teeth and white-gummed. But when his voice came again, growled like distant thunder, there was anger there rather than humour. It seemed to radiate from him like a cold current in the ocean. "We didn't. They did. Those infected little bastards appear to have served a purpose after all." He was muttering, apparently talking to himself rather than me. "They followed the stench of your fear, and we simply followed them. Always hungry, the rats. Did you see them?" Rats? I thought about the creature that had attacked me in the cave, its twisted mouth, surely too wide to be human, and filled with rows of dripping shark teeth that seemed to stretch all the way back to its red, raw gullet. Then I thought of the other figure, the one who'd saved me and guided my blind body to safety. It was too strange to make any sense of, so I simply shook my head again. Just as well. You were lucky." He laughed again, that soulless snatch of air. "Or maybe not." "Why? What are you going to do with us?" he asked through snot and saliva. The warden raised his arms, and the flock of dark forms behind him seemed to come to life. The dogs began to growl, the black suits struggling to hold them back with steel leashes. Lurking behind them, the wheezers seemed to take a single asthmatic breath, their limbs jerking like they were puppets. "As you know all too well, obedience is the difference between life, death, and the other forms of existence on offer in Furnace," said the warden, his voice quieter, yet seeming to pulse around the cavern with even more force. "Your actions have cost me a great deal of time, money, and respect from the other prisoners, who have all been told that you died in the explosion. I would have strung you up and slaughtered you like the vermin you are, or you are far more useful to me as specimens." He said the last word with a relish that made my skin crawl, bending down so that his face was inches from mine. "Your punishment for trying to escape will be death. Of a kind, anyway. But long before it comes, you will be begging to be put out of your misery." Until that moment, none of it seemed real. Maybe I was so tired I couldn't process it. It was all too absurd. But right then, with the warden's decaying breath on my face, I realised that just when things seemed like they couldn't have gotten any worse, they had. A lot worse. "A month. In solitary," came his whisper. "If the rats don't find a way to kill you, then the madness will. And if you make it, if by some miracle you're not a gibbering wreck when we pull you out, then the wheezers can have you. And that's when the fun truly begins." Both Z and I were crying now. We remembered Donovan's stories of solitary, of what it could do to you. We were going to die in there, in the most slow and agonising way imaginable. Surely this couldn't happen. Surely the outside world had to know something bad was going on in Furness. Except I had no idea if the outside world even existed anymore. To be honest, I wasn't sure if it ever had. There was only Furness. It was our world, our grave, our hell. "Take them away," said the warden, followed by the dull laughter of the black suits as they advanced. "Take them to the hole." What time is it? Go on, we'll do one more. The hole. I don't know why I said that in the warden's voice. The hole. The moments following the warden's final command were lost to fear, blotted out by my faltering brain. I could tell you what I saw, but I don't truly remember it. The human mind is a powerful thing in many ways, but in others it's endlessly fragile. It takes only a single moment of pure terror to tear a hole in it, like a finger through a cobweb, leaving you forever just a shadow, a half person. God only knows how mine was still functioning. It could only be because when things got so bad, the emotional side of it simply shut down, making me a machine that could see and hear and think but not feel. This automatic damage control had saved me from madness many times, but I knew it wouldn't last long. Not in the hole. As soon as the warden had stepped to one side, his nightmare posse moved into the space he had left. Like dark water flooding into a vacuum, they crashed and spat around us, the dogs snapping their man-trap jaws so close to our faces I could feel their hot mucus hit my skin. The wheezers convulsing with excitement as the black suits scooped us up effortlessly by our overalls. My feet dragged pathetically on the smooth floor as we were taken through a massive steel door set into the rock. It reminded me of the vault door back in the prison, only this one was half the size and looked like it had been pounded by a couple of 100 mortar shells. There wasn't a fraction of its surface free from dents, and it hung off its hinges like a peeling skin after a vacation. I thought for a moment that someone had broken their way out of it, only it was hanging inwards, the scars covering the outside. Someone had broken in. It had to have been the creatures I'd seen in the cavern, the rats, as the warden had called them. If they could do that to a metre-thick metal door, what could they have done to me? We turned corner after corner, the footsteps of the guards echoing down too many corridors to count. These passages all seemed to blur into one another, a labyrinth of mottled, flesh-coloured rock brought to life by the flickering lamps embedded in the ceiling. There were openings in the walls too, shadowed portals that led to nothing but darkness, eyes that seemed to watch us pass with disapproval. I ignored most of these, just as I did everything else, but there was one time when I snapped out of my numbness and managed to focus on the world around me. I was being pulled past an opening in the rock, much wider than the others, the word infirmary stencilled in faded white paint. This one was emanating a fierce crimson light that turned the black suits and their dogs into blood-drenched ghosts. Sorry. I peered around the body of the brute who held me, trying to get a better look at where the doorway led, but it was sealed off by a curtain of thick plastic strips, the same kind you see in a butcher's workshop. The wheezers split off from the rest of the group here, walking one by one through the drooping slats like some nightmare factory line. Last to go was the black suit who was carrying Gary, the boy's body sliding through and vanishing into the light. And then we were past it, reaching a T-junction in the corridor and turning right. It was here that the guard dropped me unceremoniously to the floor, rolling me onto my back with his giant foot and pinning me there. "The hole's just down there," he said through a grin as wide as any I'd ever seen, his eyes glinting like a cat's caught in the moonlight. "You killed 2 of us in that explosion, you know that?" I thought back to the moment the explosive gloves in the ceiling had detonated, the 2 black suits who had inadvertently shielded us from the blast. They had both survived, for a few moments, one trying to take my life and the other saving it. Monty, it had been, turned into a monster, stripped of everything human. If they catch you, just don't forget your name." "I said, did you know that?" the guard repeated, pressing down harder. I nodded, watching my misshapen head bob in the polished black leather of his boot. "If it was up to me, we'd feed you to the dogs right here, but the boss says we're keeping you. Still, accidents happen, especially when prisoners try to escape a second time." I nodded again, and then frowned, wondering what he meant. He lifted his foot, dragging me up, and from behind him, Z was thrust forwards. He slammed into me and I held him, two trembling forms before a wall of black suits and skinless dogs. "Solitary's down there," the guard repeated, his grin never faltering. "I'd say, 50 metres?" "About that," came a gravel-voiced reply. "So, how about a 5-second head start? Seem right?" Again, the voice behind him answered, "Yeah, that sounds fair." "Then if I were you, I'd start running," the guard said, "because as far as the warden needs to know, you made a break for it and the dogs got you." I didn't move, wondering if it was a trick, but two of the black suits suddenly appeared beside the one who had been holding me, each trying to restrain a monstrous canine. The foaming beasts thrashed against their leashes, the solid metal links looking as if they were about to snap like cotton thread. 5. I didn't need any more of a hint than that. We let go of each other and turned, bolting down the corridor as fast as our legs would let us. Seeing us run, the dogs started to bark, and bullets of sound that tore after us. 4. 3, came the count, almost lost beneath the hammering of our feet. "Did he say 50 metres? wheezed Z. "We'll never make it." There was no sign of anything up ahead, just bare walls that didn't even offer a shadow to hide in. 2. How far do we run? 20 metres? Maybe 30? The dogs would cover that distance in a heartbeat. 1. I didn't hear it so much as know when it had been uttered. With a twin of delight, the dogs were unleashed. The screech of their 8-clawed feet on the rock, so much faster than our own laboured steps. I wanted to turn around, but I forced myself not to. One slip, one scuff is all it would take. "There!" yelled Z, pointing down the corridor. I scanned the walls, seeing nothing in their red raw sheen. "What?" The sound more pant than a word. I knew the dogs would have halved the distance between us, driven by madness and hunger. "The floor!" Sure enough, the ground of the tunnel had several steel trapdoors set into it, each no larger than a manhole cover. I don't know what I'd been expecting when I pictured the hole, but I hadn't taken it literally. I thought it would have been a cell beneath the prison, sure, but not actually in the ground. There was no time to be choosy. The monsters were so close I could hear the ragged breaths in their throats. We reached the first of the round doors, skidding onto our knees beside it, twisting the lever and lifting the heavy hatch. The space inside, if you can call it a space, was like a coffin on its end. There wasn't even room for us both to clamber in. You take this one," I said, diving across the ground to the next steel hatch and wrenching it open. I heard the crash of steel on steel as Z's trapdoor closed, and I made the mistake of looking around. One of the dogs was in mid-leap. Its jaws opened so wide that I almost couldn't make out the immense body behind them. With a groan of fear, I swung my legs into the hole and dropped. I was just in time. The dog struck the top of the hatch and its body weight slammed it closed with a clang that made my eardrums ache. For a moment I could hear it muzzling at the steel and running its claws along the surface. Then came the distant call of a black suit and the scuffling stopped. "Damn shame," came the voice, softened by rock and metal. "Thought it had you there." The dull throb of laughter. "Still, give it a day or two and you'll be wishing they had caught you. Have fun, boys. Don't go mad too soon." There was the sound of the lever on top of the hatch being secured. Then there was nothing but darkness and the frenzied beating of my own heart. "See?" I called out softly, stretching my arms to gauge where the walls were. To my relief, the space was bigger than I'd first thought, although it was at most half the size of the cell I'd had on top. On top? I shook my head, not quite believing I'd used the phrase to describe furnace. Already the prison, with its light and its mattresses and the sound of its inmates, seemed like home. "Z!" I called out, louder this time. There was still no reply. I found the wall that separated us and thumped on it with my fist, but the noise was quickly absorbed by silence. I swore and swore again, cursing with every word I knew as I kept on driving my fist against the rock. Each time it hit, the panic set in a little more, the fear of being alone, of being in the dark, and I could picture the intricate web of my mind unravelling into insanity. "Z!" A scream this time, but my cell didn't even grant it an echo. I collapsed to the floor, found that there wasn't enough room to stretch out my legs completely. Instead, I pulled them close, my knees touching my chin, and I rocked gently. The black suit was right. Pretty soon I'd be wishing that the dogs had caught me. At least they would have had the decency to finish me off quickly. This room was a different kind of beast entirely, infinitely more patient and infinitely more terrifying. The hole didn't need monsters to do its dirty work. It had no use for brutes in black suits and their silver-eyed hounds, or wheezing freaks with filthy syringes. No, all it needed was me and my fear, because alone in the silence, in the unfathomable darkness, I knew that my own thoughts would drive me mad. My own mind would kill me. And to find out whether it does or not, you'll have to wait till tomorrow. Next chapter is called Thoughts from the Abyss. All thoughts of cotton wool, cotton candy even, and rainbows and lovely happy things, I should think. Well, just a guess. But okay, well, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you have a lovely day wherever you are. I would say whatever you're doing, but you're probably staying at home. And yeah, I will see you all tomorrow. Have a lovely day. Bye.